Hello! It is not a Tuesday, but I am expecting to be busy on the day that this video goes out, so it's time for another in real life video. This week, or this day, in this video, we are taking a general viewer submitted question. As per usual, feel free to submit your own in the comments below. It helps a ton if you include a question mark, because that lets me filter things through YouTube and sort it out very easily, and then include it and write it down or type it out into my ever-growing but also ever-shrinking list. Anyway, this week's question comes to us from this video's question comes to us from a general viewer whose username should be somewhere in the lower third of your screen right about now. They ask, quite simply, and also quite interestingly, a little divisively maybe, or not even divisively, but counter to what I would have expected. There were some responses to this, but they asked, do you think Morrowind as a video game is designed well? Mainly the gameplay systems. Which, fair enough, an interesting question, especially to ask me of all people who, I feel like asking me is wild, because I'm going to say yes. I'm saying yes. But of course, let's explain it all. Let's get into it. First and foremost, let's take a look at what you're not necessarily asking, and that being like narratively, which I think there's very little contention for. I think a lot of people would agree that Morrowind has a very sound and good and frankly aged like wine sort of story, right? And the overarching world building is very good. The story contained within and of itself about the events of the Neverine prophecy and fulfilling it. I think it's very good as well. It leans into like a fictional history very good. It has themes of, religious fundamentalism being oppressive, governments wielding state-sanctioned power to sort of silence and mind control people and essentially found a cult. It has themes of fascism, the attempt to establish a xenophobic dark elf ethno state, right? It's got a lot of cool things going for it. It's fantastic, and like I said, it's aged like wine. The only difficult thing about it is that it's difficult to appreciate it on first blush. You get more and more out of the game the more you play it, the more you sort of go through different great houses and all of that. And I do think some great house sort of quest arcs are way better than others. Like, for instance, House Hlalu, although they're total ass, right? I think they have a absolutely fantastic quest arc that very well highlights like their politicking and political corruption, and highlights some very interesting tidbits on like themes of colonialism. It's fantastic stuff. Conversely, although I love the aesthetics of Great House Redoran, and sort of like their geographical locations, they definitely gotta be the weakest of the Great House quest arcs in the game. I've been on record saying that I think Great House Redoran, the best time to tell that story is sort of in and around the Red Year, right? If you know of lore, that's like when things got really bad. I guess the easiest way to put it, it's when the volcano erupted again, right? It's when everything went terribly, terribly sideways. And Morrowind, Vardenfell in particular, the place where you explore around in Morrowind for the most part, not mainland Morrowind, but the island, got damn near wiped off the map, right? Probably the most populous sections of it completely annihilated. But that also happens to be like one of the most interesting times for Great House Redoran, and sort of like the time after that. And thus it also makes sense why Great House Hlalu would be so particularly interesting at the point in time where you are playing as the Nerevarine going through Morrowind. Like I said, the involvement of the Tamrielic Empire and sort of that colonial influence sort of seeping into Morrowind culture, and as well other derivative natures of that, wherein you're sort of looking at Great House Dunmer as opposed to Ashlanders and whatnot. You also have like the Sixth House and all of their wild stuff, their wild takes. It dovetails very nicely into like a lot of the main themes of the core game, you know, and that just is not present really in Great House Veteran, unfortunately. But they got some cool looking stuff, I think, right? They got real cool looking stuff. Big crab, cool. Anyway, if we want to look at some of the contemporaries as well, I would say that Morrowind, as far as contemporaries when it comes to like role-playing games and sort of other like narrative heavy video games of that time, you've got stuff like, let me check here. I wrote down a few. Let's see. Yeah. Baldur's, mind you, Morrowind came out originally 2002. So contemporaries within like several years or so, a few years. Baldur's Gate 2 in the year 2000. Other narrative heavy, Deus Ex, the original, Silent Hill 2, Max Payne, Metal Gear Solid 2, Sons of Liberty, KOTOR in 03, Beyond Good and Evil also in 03. Some interesting commonalities, especially for video games developed in the United States and North America for the political situation, right? Really interesting sort of commonalities there, but nonetheless, a lot of it has aged very well, unfortunately, and but regardless, some very good sort of video games. I would say that this is when video games started getting a bunch of games that were both narratively focused and sort of actually had something to say, right? These are games with stories that had like themes that have like subtext, which isn't to say that they didn't exist beforehand, but this is sort of like the first wave of them, you know. Beforehand, there were exceptions to the rule, you know, but with sort of the 2000s and onward, I feel like you finally start getting into video games being more on a narrative level, on a storytelling level, and like world building, becoming artsy, you know. They're very much art as far as like writing is concerned. You could definitely consider them as such, I think. There's no question about it, right? Like, I think just of those games, like, you know, bangers, right? Bangers. They're gonna try to remake and resell you every single one of those, right? They've already done a few, right? But we were asked specifically about gameplay, right? Which immediately the main thing that sticks out to people about Morrowind that they don't like is the combat, right? Swing and a miss, you know, you swing your weapon at an enemy and sometimes it looks like it should hit, but it simply doesn't. And I think that's fine. This is my hot take. I think that's absolutely fine. Why is that? Well, let's just get this out of the way. I think the modern mind, the 2025 or future from now, who can say, maybe things will change, but let's get real stupid with it. The modern gamer mind cannot comprehend missing an attack, right? Way back in the day, we were missing attacks. Dude, missing attacks was nothing. Oh, it looked like that attack should have hit. I guess it didn't. Guess my hit chance was too low. My hit rating, my attack rating, you know, stuff like that. Oh, maybe that only makes sense in turn-based games, you know, like your old JRPG situation. No, not true. Just in stuff like contemporaries here, and even among things I mentioned, Baldur's Gate 2, real time with pause. You can miss an attack in that game. Diablo 2, an action RPG. You miss attacks in that game. There are stats that get your hit chance up. The more you level up an attack, it also increases your hit chance. If I remember correctly, doesn't it? Your hit chance doesn't even cap out at 100. There's always a chance for like critical failure, as sort of derived from Dungeons and Dragons or like pen and paper tabletop RPG roots. You know, this is why like in right, like if you play Baldur's Gate 3, this is why, like, you know, there's critical fail, there's critical success. There's always a small chance, no matter what, you're going to screw up unless you have like a mulligan. There's always a small chance that no matter what, no matter how bad it is, you could still land something. Something still could happen in your favor, right? A lot of this is derived from that. Same goes for, I believe, KOTOR, right? KOTOR, another one which is, I believe, real time with pause. A contemporary from 2003. You would, sometimes your character would swing or shoot and you would just miss, you know? It was normal. Look no further than, I think the longest holdout for this type of RPG sort of combat mechanic would be MMORPGs, right? Obviously, if you go to like an EverQuest, you know, or my personal flavor would be like Anarchy Online, or if you play old school RuneScape, you know, which, you know, back in the day, just regular RuneScape, the new school RuneScape even, sometimes the blue little splatter appears because you missed, right? You hit, but you didn't really hit. You didn't do anything, right? Nothing happened. This is just how it worked. It wasn't that weird for anybody, you know? I think it's totally fine and totally normal. It's just that we have gotten so used to not doing it. And also, not just that we've gotten so used to it, but I think predominantly it's because video games as like a medium, as a hobby, has grown so immensely that there's a lot of people who never futzed around with stuff like that, right? And perhaps never had an interest in going back in it. Because true enough, I think it's worth crediting people who have gone super duper into the hobby and are like, yeah, I want to go back and look back in time and look at stuff like academically. You know, I want to see like, what was this game like? Not just because I want to appreciate like a fun story, or I really love this sort of world and this is like a connected series of games or whatever, but I want to go back and sort of see like the progression of it, right? I enjoy that too, right? I like that a lot. But make no mistake, there's so many other folks into video games that I think it becomes easier to forget what they were like, right? Wherein, like I said, Morrowind was just like a first person or toggled third person, if you really want to play that way, version of like what was going on in Diablo 2, you know, of what would happen if you were in World of Warcraft in the early days when they still had hit rating, you know. That's just how it went. Sometimes you would just miss an attack. You had to pay attention to your stats and get them up, just as you would in like Pathfinder or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever you have. You know, your stat is relevant. You need to get a better weapon, improve your own attributes, your own skill level, or whatever. Very normal for the time, right? And I think it's sort of, like I said, it's sort of, there's sort of a divide that you see of people who are accustomed to this, and it's like, yeah, that's no big deal. This is just how this game is played, you know? What I do think is poorly designed in Morrowind when it comes to like gameplay systems, like your core gameplay loop, which, you know, we could get very broad here with that definition, but for now we'll hone in on combat. I think what does suck are two things in particular. The tutorial, because with a really good tutorial in Morrowind, you could just point out exactly how the skill and stat system works. And like, if you just told people, even baseline, which this isn't even completely correct because there's more to it than this, but if you just told people, oh, for every single skill level you have in, like, for instance, long blade, any weapon that is long blade will have a 1% higher hit chance, right? And it's more complicated than that because agility is factored in, your fatigue level is factored in, any like fortify attack is factored in, but predominantly at the end of the day, all you really need to know is if I want to land more hits, I need to have the relevant attack skill leveled up. And there are very easy ways to get around that as well. Which, like I said, I think the tutorial kind of fails players in that way, because with a sufficient tutorial, it could convey all of that information and you just wouldn't have to worry about that going forward, right? Like people would be like, oh, okay, this is how the game works. So obviously I want to be a character who runs around using a longsword. I better have my long blade skill as high as I can get it. That is probably what I should do. But it doesn't necessarily say that. It just tells you about, like, press this button to swing your sword. Or even better, if you get into the persuasion system, my favorite bit is how, like I think I even use this for like Morrowind Mondays Volume 2. How it tells you, oh, this is the persuasion system, but you're bad at it, so don't do it, right? Don't even try, you idiot. It tells you don't even make an attempt to use the persuasion system. This game has one, right? You can persuade people, you can bribe people, and here's this guy, look, it's Celis Gravius here. you can persuade him if you want, but don't think about it. Don't even think about it, you idiot, you clown. You absolute moron. What do you know? Nothing. Because we didn't teach you anything. We barely... You should be so lucky we taught you how to pick locks in this game, that we told you how to use enchanted items, right? But what can you do? Thankfully, you know, there's been a lot of effort to sort of circumvent that and sort of ease the onboarding for people through community guides since time immemorial, myself included, right? Myself included. Now, the other system that I would say is poorly designed is stealth, right? Stealth in Morrowind. I don't even know if I would say it's poorly designed or bad. I would just say it's broken, right? I think the vast majority of people who play Morrowind and understand it know that you shouldn't even attempt stealth in earnest unless you're dramatically overcapped. And if not, anytime you want to do stealth, immediately go out and get the Amulet of Shadows and just use that instead, right? That's stealth. Stealth, Amulet of Shadows, they're one and the same. The sneak button, don't worry about it. Who cares? It's broken. It doesn't work reliably. It's a mess. It's a nightmare. Honestly, it's a miracle the like degree to which they changed and improved stealth in the technical sense. The jump from Morrowind to Oblivion is ridiculous. But yeah, that's kind of the other qualm that I have. Otherwise, we could look at stuff like enemy design, which I think it's also worth bearing in mind what type of role-playing game it is. You know, we've talked before in the past about like different archetypes of them. A sandbox role-playing game, which would be Morrowind. Very narrative-focused role-playing games, which would be like your Fallout 1 or 2 for this era. Or a sort of action role-playing game, which would be your Diablo 2, you know? Stuff like that. I think it does achieve the sandbox role-playing game, and of course, you know, it's worth bearing in mind that nothing else has really even right there's to this day nothing else is really quite doing absolutely everything that these games are doing, right? The closest you get is probably like Kenshi, or even other blends of immersive sim RPG stuff, right? That's where you get a lot of that sandbox RPG vibe. When you like throw in the immersive sim factor, you know, like your Arx Fatalis, Kingdom Come Deliverance, they get close, but never quite the same as like a Morrowind, an Oblivion, a Skyrim, you know, never quite the same. They kind of have it locked down, and nobody has really quite been able to achieve the same thing. Granted, I don't think everyone is trying to aim for the same thing either, so that's worth bearing in mind as well, and it's probably a good thing. But either way, I would welcome a copycat, because it takes forever for these games to come out, as we talked about last Tuesday, or on Tuesday, the most recent IRL video aside from this one. But yeah, I mean, if we look at let's see, yeah, where's some of the more popular games of O2? Hang on, I wrote them down here. Let me check. 1 sec. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah. O2, Mario Sunshine, Jet Set Radio Future, which I guess was more of a cult classic than a blowout hit. Final Fantasy 11, the MMO, Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, Wind Waker, Vice City. Oh my gosh, yeah. Would I say that like the quests? Okay. Here's a wild hot take for you. I think the side questing and faction and all of that experience in Morrowind clears Vice City, right? The main story of Vice City, cool, right? Pretty neat. But all the side activities in Vice City, oh my gosh. Novelty at best. Oh, you get into the cab and eventually you do enough taxi cab missions and, oh, you fight a souped up cab and then at the end you get a especially cool one or whatever, right? I'm immediately reminded of the annoying, like, tail the car missions that you were always prone to failing because of how sort of like the car's sphere of influence in a circle around the sort of like target car that you're following, that you're like tailing, would behave and would treat around turns, right? So if you're doing a turn, there's going to be a point in time where around like the right angle of the turn, the car you're tagging is going to get way closer and then immediately start flying off, right? So there's that sort of like, not a Goldilocks zone. If anything, it's like an anti-Goldilocks zone, where you get there and like you're about to fail the quest, you're about to fail the mission. Or oh my gosh, imagine think back to if you played Vice City, you'll probably immediately know what I'm talking about. Those god awful little like toy helicopter flying missions, weren't those Vice City, or am I thinking of like GTA 3 or San Andreas? Maybe they were in all of them. But I definitely remember, like, for one of the property quests or whatever, they're like real estate quests, I think it was, you had to do a whole bunch of these stupid quests and missions involving like a toy helicopter, and it was such a nightmare. Oh my God. I remember that. Oh, it was horrifying. It was atrocious. But regardless, that's neither here nor there. I do think sort of like that side questing experience, the sort of like sandbox experience of Morrowind, is, would I say it's second to none for this era of games? Looking at sort of what we've got. Yeah, because a lot of the like narrative powerhouses of that time, you know, like your Silent Hill 2, your Max Payne, your Sons of Liberty, Metal Gear, your KOTOR, a lot of those were not sandbox in nearly the same sense. Yeah, I would say it clears them. It clears them, you know? Baldur's Gate 2 had some really cool side questing, but it didn't get into... Baldur's Gate 2 side questing didn't feel like... It doesn't feel the same, and I think that's because they're different types of RPGs, right? One is more narrative focused, and the other is more sandbox focused. Right, which isn't to say that, you know, Morrowind doesn't have a good narrative or whatever, but it's more focused on delivering that sandbox experience, you know. But yeah, I absolutely, I think to go back to sort of like surmise everything, I think Morrowind is absolutely designed well. I think it has good design, except for those two cases that I mentioned. I think you could. I could hear someone out for saying that like the dialogue system sucks, but if you consider that originally the game was PC only, suddenly it makes a lot more sense and becomes a lot more like amicable and understandable where they were coming from, and it functions way better on a PC. Like doing it on the console version, oh my god. Right? If you were playing on an original Xbox, I don't know, I guess it was a miracle that they could even get the game running on that at all. But playing it on PC was the sort of like wiki style of dialogue navigation. I think it functions just fine for it, right? I think it functions just fine for it. It is kind of a unique dialogue system, but I think it's all right. You know, I don't mind it. But that said, I'm incredibly biased. Like I'm a wild person to ask this, right? Because I'm so heavily biased in favor of Morrowind, right? So yeah, to reiterate, my two criticisms would be stealth is just busted, right? Stealth is just busted, and the tutorial sucks. The tutorial sucks butts. But aside from that, I think it's good. I think it's competent, you know? Aside from when things are maybe bugged or miswritten, right? I think it's good and fun. There are ways in which you can break the game, but you the player are electing to break it, right? And thus, you know, it is reinforcing the nature of the game, it being a sandbox RPG. If you want to break the game, then go ahead and do it, you know? I do think that I have qualms with like being able to get your character way overpowered, right? And like being able to levitate or like do super jumping everywhere, running at super duper high speeds. I think that can kind of spoil the level design, either of the open world or like some of the better dungeons that aren't just like holes in the ground. You know, like your Kogaroon, like your Arkensund from the beginning out by Balmora. You know, dungeons like that, they're typically tied to like the main story quests or something like that, where they're very intricate and involved. I think ridiculous movement kind of spoils it, but it doesn't make it bad because it was good originally, right? It's sufficient and like enjoyable to explore that without the like super overpowered stats, without like sending your speed through the damn roof, you know, being able to like pull off scrolls of Icaranian flight with just your like enchanted equipment or whatever, you know, like stuff like that is busted. But it almost, you know what it reminds me of? It granted, one is a lot more of an action RPG, that's its main goal, and Morrowind is, like we had said, it's more of a sandbox RPG. But sort of the same design ethos is at play there, wherein the player is choosing to make the game easier. You're choosing to break it. You're choosing to go one route, you know? You could critique and say that like the player shouldn't be trusted with that power because maybe the player, you think, well, most people playing this are stupid, right? Most people are going to get a bad impression about the game, and they're going to spoil it for themselves because they don't know what to do with that kind of power, right? But my point of comparison here would be a From Software game, right? An Elden Ring, a Dark Souls, wherein you can change around your equipment or use different tactics and stuff, which are just markedly, blatantly easier. You know, it's just hard to parry, right? That's sort of, I want to say that that's always been since time immemorial in those and From Software games, that the stages of difficulty are like, okay, just blocking an attack is the easiest thing ever because there's like very little timing required, very little precision. If you want a little bit tougher, you instead try to do a dodge roll. And in some of the games, you can manipulate the effectiveness and the amount of invincibility frames, the amount of iframes you have in your dodge roll. And the other is like parrying dudes, right? And there's a different risk and reward, right? For instance, if you parry them, you get rewarded by like massively opening up probably 75, if not more % of enemies to like a critical attack and just being able to lay into them. That's the risk reward. Whereas if you're using a shield to just tank attacks, you're at minimum really screwing up your stamina. So you need to like pace combat, pace it out a little bit slower and be a little bit more conservative with it. That way you don't run out of stamina and like get your blocking stance broken, and then thus you are the one being laid into. And also there are shields that do not block with 100% efficacy. Some damage bleeds through, right? Like, so if you block, especially early game when you're working with poorer equipment, if you block, I don't know, someone swinging a hammer at you, there's a decent chance that like early on, depending on what shield you have equipped, especially if you didn't pick like the knight class or whatever, you'll have a shield that only absorbs 80% of that incoming physical damage. So you get like the 20% bleed through, which if you don't finish off the enemy or use like a healing item, use an Estus, you're going to take that 20% bleed in. You're opting in for like, what is the trade-off that you want, you know? What's the risk reward? How comfortable are you with this versus that, right? It makes for, in Dark Souls or whatever, it makes for a very interesting like gameplay decision. In Morrowind, being a sandbox RPG, it makes for a more compelling sandbox where you could break stuff if you wanted to, right? I think you could have a debate about how much the player should be allowed to break stuff, because I do think it's an argument worth having, or not an argument worth having, but like it's a thought worth having about how much freedom do you want to give the player? Because for real, are they going to, right? Like, are most people going to take the scenic route, or are they going to just take the fastest route? You know, and how much do you want them to take this scenic route? You know, how much do you want someone to walk from Saint Denis to Balmora versus how much do you want them to like do a super jump from Saint Denis to Balmora? Or alternatively, just take the Silt Strider or whatever, right? But you could use any number of locations in the game for that. No, that's just a stand-in. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at on it. Morrowind, I think it's good. Right at the end of the day, I think Morrowind's good. I think it's good. I think it's designed pretty good, except for those two things I said. Those are the standout problems for me. Is that stealth is busted, and the tutorial sucks. Right. Aside from that, I think it's good, right? Just build your character out in a good way, and you won't have much problem, right? Buy some skill training if you want to use Longblade. Maybe you should think about leveling it up, right? This is just how we were. This is how it was back in the day. That ought to do it for this one. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Yeah, Morrowind's good. And that's the takeaway. So like I said, what are we doing asking me? Right? I'm like, I'll be the first to admit I'm biased, right? Morrowind, I think that's good. I think it's a good one. All right, until next time, please take care of each other.